Hello, 10th grade students. Today we're going to get started with the first of several revolutions that we're going to study. We're going to look briefly at the scientific revolution. Now this is kind of a unique topic for us in your history class because we're actually studying to an extent the history of science. Some of the stuff we're going to look at today is very similar to what you have learned or you will learn in some of your other biology or chemistry or even physics classes a little bit later on in your academic career. So the first question we're going to look at is, how did the following help pave the way for the scientific revolution? There's two ideas that we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about the Renaissance. Now, we've talked about the Renaissance before. You guys know some of the Renaissance prominent figures that we've studied. There we go. Leonardo da Vinci was one of the prominent people around during the Renaissance. And, during the Renaissance, there was a big spirit of curiosity. People were asking questions like Leonardo da Vinci. Scholars and scientists, they began to question ideas that had been around for a really long time. They started to say, hey, look, what we've studied for so long and what we've held as fact, this doesn't really make sense if we observe things and look at them in a little bit more detail. Finally, another part of the Renaissance, or which helped the Renaissance spread actually, was the printing press. The printing press made it very easy to copy ideas and then to distribute them to very large audiences. And so that helped a lot of these ideas from the Renaissance spread to different parts of the world. And also it helped the ideas from the scientific revolution spread much more quickly than they could have in the past. There's a little picture of the original printing press down there for you. Okay, so another thing that helped pave the way for the scientific revolution was European exploration. Now this is another topic that we've studied in some detail in chapter 3. Some of these voyages, as you can see in that map, some of the routes that some of the European explorers were taking by sea, these were long voyages. And part of that was made possible because of the technology that they had available. They had better navigational instruments. And you can see that over time, when they were doing these different types of voyages, they were making more and more observations. It was kind of like they were recording the data. It was almost just like they were doing research. So, and as you can see, one of the instruments they were using that we studied before is the astrolabe down there. That statue is a picture of a man using that instrument. And as they kind of compiled this research and this data, they started to notice that what they were observing, particularly in the sky with the stars and with their instruments, is that what they were observing didn't always match up with some of the ancient beliefs or practices that had been taught for a very long time. And so both the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration sort of started getting people asking questions, started to pave the way for the scientific revolution. So the next thing we're going to ask about is, we're going to study specifically a few different scientists, and we're going to ask, what did each scientist discover about the universe? Now, number 3 is about Nicholas Copernicus. Nicholas Copernicus was a Polish scientist, and he's the one that developed the heliocentric theory. Now, you need to know this term, heliocentric theory. That means that the sun is the center of the solar system. It also means that all the planets orbit around the sun. This is different than what came before. If you look at the diagram before, this is the model that came before. Look at the center of that diagram. It's not the sun that's at the center, it's the earth. And Copernicus's theory that the sun was actually the center was radically different than what had been going on and the beliefs that people had had for a very long time. So the other thing that you should write down is that in this heliocentric theory, all planets orbit around the sun, heliocentric, and not the earth, which is geocentric. Now in that diagram there, that's the geocentric model. I'm going to change it over now, and you can obviously see the difference. There's the heliocentric model with the sun in the middle instead of the earth. The planets are orbiting around the sun in our solar system, not around the earth. Another scientist that we can talk a little bit about is Mr. Kepler. Now, Kepler was a mathematician by a lot of ways, but we could also call him a scientist. And he studied and observed how mathematical laws govern planetary motion. And by govern, we mean how they dictate, how they set up, how they are the rules by which the planets follow. Now, Kepler's idea is that orbits are elliptical. This is a lot easier to show you than to just explain. You can see in this diagram that those planets that are orbiting around the sun, notice, still heliocentric, right? Kepler wasn't going against Copernicus. But his idea of the orbits was different. From that diagram we looked at on the last slide, those orbits were circular. But from Kepler's observations, he noticed that the planets were not orbiting in circles around the sun. Instead, they were ellipses. And that's what we say when we mean that the orbits are elliptical. You can look at the way that those lines are going around the sun. It's like an oval. It's not a perfect circle. Another scientist that's very important that we'll study a little bit later too is Galileo Galilei, often just referred to as Galileo. Now, Galileo observed a couple important things. First of all, he noticed that Jupiter has moons. So why didn't anybody notice this before? Well, Galileo is one of the first scientists that really started to study closely using a telescope, and that's why we have that picture down there. So he was able to observe these objects that were appearing in the sky around Jupiter, and he figured out that those were actually moons. So it wasn't just the Earth that had a moon now. Another thing that he noticed is that the sun and the moon are not perfect. This is an idea that had been preached for a long time and taught and supported by the Catholic Church, actually. And Galileo was able to notice with his telescope that the sun had different spots on it, that the moon had craters, that they weren't just perfect spheres. And again, this was going against the popular beliefs at the time. Another thing that Galileo did is that he wrote a book which defended the theories of Copernicus. Remember, Copernicus is a scientist that came up with the heliocentric theory. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but the church had condemned Copernicus's ideas. They said that they were not right. They said that the Earth was the center of the solar system, and that's what the Catholic Church taught, and no one should challenge it. And so for Galileo to challenge the church and to say, no, actually Copernicus's ideas are correct, this was a kind of a radical thing, and we're going to study a little bit later, but Galileo was actually put on trial because of this book that he wrote. All right, another person we're going to take a little bit of a look at is number 6, Isaac Newton. Now, Isaac Newton was an English scientist. He's very important to physics, and he came up with a couple rules and laws that we still follow today that are still scientifically proven to this day. One of them is that gravity rules all matter on Earth and space. One thing we can never get away from that's always existed is gravity. And another thing that he noticed about gravity is that it has variables that it depends on. And two of those variables are mass and distance. So the force of gravity will depend on how big two objects are and the distance between them. And Newton was one of the first guys to come up with that idea. So the next section we're going to ask what important developments took place in the following areas. And we have 3 areas we're going to look at. First area is the scientific instruments. Now there's a few that you need to know, and let's just go through them. A few of these you already understand already. You know what a telescope is, pictured over to the side here. You know what a microscope is, something that you can use to help you look at very small things such as cells. Thermometer also came along this time. Most of you know that that's used to measure temperature. And then another type of meter that we have is the barometer. This measures atmospheric pressure. You can see from the pictures, the bottom pictures on the right, a very rudimentary barometer. Basically, as you can see the blue arrow pointing down, if atmospheric pressure increases, it will push down on the mercury inside of there, and in the glass tube the mercury will rise, and then this will be attached to some sort of a scale as we have on the right hand side. And knowing atmospheric pressure helps us predict and understand weather much better than we could previously. Another important area that we want to look at is medicine. Medicine started to improve greatly during the scientific revolution. People started studying the human anatomy much more closely and understanding how it worked. Now, people have been doing this for a little while, like back in the days of Leonardo da Vinci, but da Vinci actually had to do it secretly. If people knew that he was dissecting human bodies, they thought he would have been participating in witchcraft. So the study of the human anatomy during the scientific revolution several decades after Leonardo began to change our perception and understanding of how the human body works. Another thing that started to come out were the first vaccines. Now, you've all had vaccines, whether you know what they are or not. Usually it's an injection that you get that will introduce a very weak form of some sort of disease. During the scientific revolution, the first vaccine that came out was for smallpox. So what would happen is they would inject a very weakened form of smallpox into your body. It was weak enough that your body could conquer and destroy this disease. And as it was doing that, your body created what's called antibodies, the cells that could destroy this type of disease. So later, if you ever were exposed to the actual disease, your body already had the defenses to be able to fight off that disease. And so some of the first vaccines that we saw were during the scientific revolution for the disease of smallpox. Finally, the last part we're going to talk about is important developments that took place in chemistry. So a couple things that you need to know. First, you need to know Boyle's law came out. Boyle said that there's a relationship between volume and pressure for gas. And then another thing that you should know is that, lo and behold, humans discovered oxygen. Now, they'd been breathing it for a pretty long time, but they actually discovered the element and realized that how important it was to human existence. Okay, thanks a lot for listening, guys. Please make sure you have this done. If you need to watch again, please don't hesitate, and I will see you tomorrow.